Hello, I'm Nikolai Yanev from Learning Project team, and today we'll have a lecture dedicated to climate change and green transition. Actually, it is about the stories that lakes and rivers tell us. Our guest is Vesela Eftimova from the Bulgarian Academy of Science, and I will ask her in the beginning to briefly introduce herself.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm an associate professor with the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. My focus of research is mainly freshwater, and I'm also a member of the APEX Bulgaria and the Bulgarian Antarctic Institute. I'm interested in studying freshwaters in Europe, including subarctic, also in Antarctica.
Well, thank you for accepting our invitation to become our guest lecturer. Would you briefly introduce the topic of your lecture? What are the water ecosystems?
Water ecosystems or an ecosystem could be perceived, each water body could be perceived as one ecosystem. It is a cohesive entity of several building blocks. We can divide them in two main groups. These are the environment and the organisms. In the case of lakes and rivers, under environment, we understand the water, the bottom substrata, and also the littoral zone in the case of lakes and the riparian zone in the case of rivers. In terms of organisms, these ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, can include all or some of the following, like bacteria, algae, macrophytes. These are plants that are attached to the bottom or floating on the water. We have also zooplankton, benthic invertebrates, fish, and other vertebrates, or any organism that basically spends their entire life in the water, part of its life cycle, or is in some way associated with the water. These aquatic ecosystems, they can have different complexity depending on the members and on the structure of both groups of building blocks. And what is important is that actually all the organisms within this ecosystem, they interact. They interact among themselves, but they also interact with the environment. And depending on this interaction, we reach the so-called dynamic equilibrium, which is, let's say, the natural state of this ecosystem. Aquatic ecosystems, they can interact also with the surrounding environment, with other nearby aquatic ecosystems, or with the land. Briefly, that's what we study.
You said that you study the water ecosystems, and I know that you have invested years and tons of efforts in this exploration of the aquatic life. Can you tell us, our listeners, why it is important to explore the water ecosystems? What's their relation to the natural world we humans are part of?
By studying lakes and rivers, we gain, first of all, knowledge about their diversity. We gain also knowledge about the processes that happen there. We gain knowledge about the mechanisms that are in place. What, as hydrobiologists, these are the people that study water ecosystems, is important for us could be divided in three main groups, like who lives there, what are the processes in these environments, and what are the environments themselves, and the third one is how do we define this equilibrium state. I'll give you some brief examples how these relate to us as humans. First of all, maybe you know that fresh water actually is quite scarce on our planet. About 1% of all the surface of our planet is occupied by fresh water. But regardless of that, fresh water, like rivers and lakes, they host about 10% of all animal species on Earth. So this is really a huge amount in respect with the ratio of the surface lakes and rivers occupy. And also in freshwater we could find 1/3 of all vertebrate species. So basically it is important to know their biodiversity because by knowing it we can protect it, and we need to protect it because it's very important within the biodiversity of our planet. As I said, all organisms are interlinked. They're interlinked within the ecosystem. They're linked among ecosystems. So if we in some way harm the fresh water, we can harm like the ecosystem health of our planet. Another reason why it is important to study fresh water, as you mentioned, it's a critical natural resource that we people benefit. Maybe this is the closest to our human practical side, because fresh waters they can provide different goods. Some of them are direct, some of them are indirect, and they're essential for the well-being of all humans on the planet. The very simple and the first one maybe to come to mind is drinking water. Then we have hydropower generation. We have also biodiversity. I explained why it is a good that is provided by fresh water. We have also importance of these ecosystems in the cycles of the different gases in the atmosphere. And they even affect the climate. They are important even for the climate on our planet. And all these goods, we define them as ecosystem services.
You said that all organisms are interlinked. I currently watch TV series The Rig. It's dedicated to a group of explorers who go deep down the sea and observe some changes in the structure of the planet following our interaction with the living world. It's a pure fiction. Still, we are organisms like the other organisms on the planet Earth, and we are interlinked with the other too. What can you tell us? What happens when we disturb the ecosystems? Is it possible for the changes in the lakes and rivers to trigger further environmental changes? And can you give us examples of this?
Actually, yes. I will give you examples, but let's first answer to the first part of your question. When we have a disturbance, it's very important to first to be able to identify this disturbance and to be able to see that there is something happening in the ecosystem, that this equilibrium is changing. First, we need to know the ecosystem. So this is how the process goes if we try to simplify it. The first step is to get to know the ecosystem, and then once we know who lives there and what are the processes, when we have a disturbance, we can use different assessment systems to identify this disturbance. For example, we could use the species that live in one river, and we can say, okay, we have species A, species B, but we don't have species C and D. So this means that the quality of the water is, let's say, very good or very bad. And when we disturb this system, because we have interlinked communities living with it, we have this association with the environment, sometimes this system manage to cope with this disturbance when the disturbance is not very extreme. Other times it is possible that changes are triggered. Let's say we are studying a lake in the high mountains. There the animals that live are usually have very particular requirements to the environment. They like colder waters. So if we imagine that the water is warmer, even by a fraction of the degree, this very specific species is not feeling comfortable in its environment. It's possible that its numbers are going to drop dramatically. And when this happens, we have like empty space, a niche that is possible to be occupied by more tolerant species. And then we have this complete change in the communities, in the biodiversity, which can affect the ecosystem, can affect its development, because each ecosystem is like a superorganism. It has its, like the stages of humans, it has its like baby stage, it has the child, it has the adult, and then the dying system is the last stage. So if we disturb the system, if we change even one species, it's possible to trigger these changes and to speed up this process and to shorten the life of a certain water body. What is important for us as scientists is to know what are the natural conditions, so that we know that they're modified. It is important to see how does the system respond. The response could be very dramatic or not visible at all. It is important also to study the various disturbances, because they can impact the system in a different way. And it is important, maybe the most important, is to be able to come up with strategies to protect and manage freshwater ecosystems in a sustainable way. What I didn't say at the beginning is that if this disturbance is very small, the ecosystem has the capacity to fight it back. It has, for example, one lake has the capacity to purify itself. So even if we input something that is some pollutant, let's say from agriculture, if the amount of this pollutant is not so high, the lake is able to cope. But there is a threshold above which the ecosystem health is damaged, and then things are getting much more complicated. As for your second question, is it possible for changes in the lakes and river to trigger back changes in our environment? I can give you an example of two studies that I was involved. They're associated with climate change and the greenhouse gases that we have in the atmosphere. One of your previous lectures gave a talk on the topic. I think his name was Associate Professor Grigorov from
Yes.
Sofia University. So I'm not going into details what is the greenhouse effect. But we have this, the concentration of CO2, carbon dioxide, of methane in the atmosphere that affect these processes. And how are lakes and rivers associated with this? It turns out that their contribution to the concentration of these two gases in the atmosphere is actually substantial. And this came to light only in the recent couple of decades, maybe. So what can happen is, if we have a clean river, it can absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. This is good for us because it's helping our planet. The concentration is dropping. But if we have some pollution, or if we have some changes in the ecosystem as a result of climate change, then these rivers start to emit CO2. Even a tiny fraction, but it's still contributing to the increase of its concentration in the atmosphere. So imagine if we damage the ecosystem. Once it's already damaged by climate change, then it contributes further to climate change. So it's like an avalanche of reactions happening. So this is one such example.
It reminds us to be careful what we are doing, because it could strike back to us.
Yes, and what we do here in Europe could affect the Antarctic ponds and lakes as well, because I studied these processes there. For now, most of the lakes I study are working in our favor. They either have zero emission or they are absorbing CO2. Only one of the lakes that I studied, I don't know, many lakes. Only one of them is emitting but very low concentration of CO2. So we have to be mindful what we do here and now, because it can affect us in the future, or it could affect somebody else living at the other end of the world.
So the changes you are talking about are not only a matter of fiction but also of knowledge, and scientists observe, explore, and can witness for the whole society about what is changing in the natural world around us. For instance, can you tell us what happens with a lake when its water levels change sharply, owing to either natural cycles or due to human activities? And then what is the difference when processes occur in a natural way and when they are influenced by the humans?
Actually, hydrological stress and disturbance for rivers and lakes has been one of the key stressors for the last many years. The reason for that is that we need water, and sometimes we just abstract it from a river or a lake. The main drivers of this hydrological crisis, let's say, are water abstraction, agriculture, human growth, technological development, and there are many other different reasons. Again, if we abstract in a sustainable way, the lake or the river could cope to a certain extent. But if we do this in a more aggressive way, then of course the system is going to respond. Actually, we have natural water level fluctuations. If we take the lake ecosystem as an example, and sometimes they could be very important and essential for the ecosystem. What happens when we have a change in water level? We have two scenarios. If we withdraw water, then we have a shift of the terrestrial part downwards the slope. So basically we have change from aquatic to terrestrial environment, which is a completely different. And the organisms that don't move fast enough, they're going to die. They're not going to survive. We can have the opposite option. Imagine in case of flooding, we have increase of the water level, then we have the conversion of previously terrestrial zone into aquatic one. As I mentioned, yes, there are natural cycles. This is naturally occurring, this shift up and down is naturally occurring in nature. And for example, we have some plant species, macrophytes, and it's essential for their survival because they have different stages of their life. I'm not going to go into details, but it is important to have these fluctuations. And if people regulate the natural water level, it's going to harm these species. What is typical of this natural fluctuation is that they tend to be gradual and they tend to be predictable or seasonal. We know when they're happening. In terms of the anthropogenic or the induced water level fluctuations, when we take the more extreme case, what happens there is that usually they're not so gradual and sometimes they're not predictable because we tend to abstract water when anyways we need more water when the weather is dry. So we have on one hand we can define it as natural or driven by climate change drop of water level because of these higher temperatures. On the other hand, because of the higher consumption of water from the respective lake. To be able to properly explain what happens, we need to know the disturbance. We need to know the magnitude. We need to pay attention to the frequency, to the time of this water level fluctuation, the speed, the rate of change, and many different factors. So it is not as simple to explain, but I did my thesis on this topic, and in order to be able to look just at one stressor, I built my own lakes where I was manipulating the water levels. And the zone that is most affected, of course, is the zone that is near the shore. This is called littoral zone because this is where we have this conversion from terrestrial into aquatic and vice versa. So what I found was that actually extreme changes in the amplitude can lead to changes, dramatic changes in biodiversity. It could change even the bottom substrate. It could change the community structure. It could lead to more invasive alien species. These are the alien species that are introduced from another environment, and they are thriving in these disturbed ecosystems. And basically, we could reach a complete change of the structure and functioning of the communities that live within these environments. I checked my results also in natural lakes. It was not all controlled, and the results were confirmed. So basically, yes, such an extreme disturbance can lead to extreme consequences for the ecosystem. And we can sometimes predict this based on the catchment area, based on the shore, based on the slope, based on different parameters that we could just measure and see in advance. And if we take this into account, we can propose measures or propose ways to abstract water in a more sustainable way. This is the idea of doing studies like this.
We heard words about the fragility and about the dangers for the aquatic species, but on the optimistic side, can we tell that they are survivors? Can you tell us whether and how water organisms survive in extreme environments?
They are survivors. Aquatic invertebrates, which are my favorite, are extremely resourceful in finding ways in surviving in the most unexpected places on Earth. I had the pleasure to do some study in the subarctic, in Iceland and in Lapland, with one of my colleagues some years ago. So there, for example, in Iceland, you have a lake. On one side, you have the glacier. On the other side, you have a hot spring. So it's a completely stressful environment. There is this dramatic change of temperature. Usually in these subarctic lakes and rivers, we have lower temperature, we have higher ultraviolet radiation. In some of these areas where we have hot springs, we have the impact of geothermal activity. So what we found is that we had a lot of mutants in these lakes and rivers. What I mean is, for example, we have a crustacean, a tiny, tiny crustacean, and imagine it's supposed to have two hands. Instead, it has two hands, and at the end of one of its hands, it has another palm with another set of fingers. The interesting thing is that these mutants, they survive, and they're not as rare as you would imagine, because this could happen also in humans. You can have an extra finger, but this is not common. And in these communities, for some of the species that we studied, we have a very high frequency of occurrence of these malformations. And the funny thing is that sometimes these changes, they affect their reproductive system. And you would imagine, okay, if it affects the reproductive system, it's probably going to harm the reproduction. So these particular mutants, they're going to die out. This is especially true also for some species against small crustacean in Antarctic lakes. Like every third one has something that is not according to the morphological description. It's not as it's supposed to be. And they're thriving in these lakes. Actually, they're like the lord of the lakes over there, this particular species with this high percentage of mutation. So this is quite impressive. The same crustacean also has another adaptation for the higher ultraviolet radiation. Its body is completely orange or dark red. And our hypothesis is that they turn this color by ingesting colorful algae that live on the bottom of the ponds, or bacteria. What is the most impressive one, and this is a very recent study we did with my colleagues in Antarctica, is that the female appears to direct this pigment she ingests with the food to the eggs. So because the eggs they cannot actively eat, they cannot protect themselves. So the mother is taking care of the generation. It's taking away from her pigment and concentrating it in the eggs in order to protect them. So these are some of the evolutionary mechanisms these organisms use to be able to survive in such an environment. I don't know, maybe some of you go to caves. Over there it's the completely different process because these environments are completely dark, and the organism, the stigobionts, that they're called, these are the organisms that spend their entire life in the cave or on groundwater. They are deprived of any pigmentation because they don't need it. They don't have this interaction with ultraviolet radiation, so they don't need it. So the evolution went in this way that they lost their pigmentation, some of them lost their sight, but how do they compensate for this? They develop other mechanisms so that they are able to be mindful of where to find food or predators. So their other senses are kind of, let's say, improving. And yeah, the world of these tiny freshwater organisms is incredible with all their tricky way of adapting, and you can find them almost everywhere.
It is more intriguing, fascinating than any plot the cinema could offer us. I mean, this real world of small creatures telling stories about the world that we live in, being interrelated with us and sharing common ancestry with us in a way.
In a way.
So I'm very thankful for being our guest and telling our listeners the stories that you have learned from the lakes and rivers. I hope that we will have chances to listen to you sharing your knowledge about the natural world again. I guess our readers who are curious to learn more will have the chance to read through the short bibliographical reference that you will provide to your lecture, and maybe they can watch some resources available online too.
I would be happy to provide these. Yeah, thank you for the invite once again. I'm always happy to talk about this amazing world of fresh water that is almost invisible for the eye, but any of us, if they look harder, they can see these tiny crustaceans or the mussels and snails that are crawling on the bottom or floating in the water column. They have other stories to tell, so I would be happy to tell more another time.
Thank you, Vesela.
Thank you.